Welcome to another conversation in practical theology. I'm Sayyyidah Zaidi, and I'm here with my co-host Eric Stoddart. And today we're really lucky and blessed to be joined with Owen Griffiths. We've both known Owen for a number of years, and the topic of today's conversation is going to be practical theology for everyday life. I wonder if we want to just kind of explore for a couple of minutes why practical theology or even any lived religion, spiritual formation, whatever we might wish to call it, is so significant in the kind of concept of lived experience in everyday life. Owen, can I invite you to share some thoughts?
Wow, that's a really big topic. First of all, hi. Really chuffed that you've asked me to come on this again. Not only chuffed, but terrified as well. I hope that I have something that is worthwhile hearing to say. I think theology is about the everyday. It has to be about the everyday. Theology, the theology that we hold shapes our worldview. And it shapes our worldview, and therefore it, together with the communities that we belong to, and it leads us into those communities, particularly if we're talking about communities of faith, then it shapes also our identity. And therefore, identity and worldview, you're talking about the stuff of every day here. This is who I am. I am a Christian. That Christian faith does not belong to any specific time of the week, any day of the week, any time of the day, any specific activity. It is there. It is me. It seeps into all that I am and forms all that I do. And so practical theology, therefore, I mean, it is a way of living, isn't it? Practical theology. We talk so much about theological reflection and so on. I mean, again, that's not something that we do only when we study in practical theology at university. The various models for theological reflection, those are the stuff. That's the stuff of wisdom. That's how we make decisions. That's how we live our lives. That's how we become who we are becoming. And therefore, for me, practical theology, it has to be part and parcel of everyday life.
Owen, can you say a little bit about what for you everyday life comprises at the moment? Because we've known you in various roles, not least as chair of BIAP, the British and Irish Association of Practical Theology, for quite some time. But give us a little insight into what everyday life for Owen is at the moment.
Okay. Let me start with my home life. I am married, have no children, married to Angharad, and we live in the Rhondda Valley, in the Rhondda Fach, which is an area of, well, it's post-industrial in South Wales, a post-industrial area of South Wales. I live in a miner's terraced house that has recently been flooded. And therefore that is very much on our minds. And so that is my everyday at the moment. In fact, the insurance people are going to be coming around this morning to have a look at that. I mention that purely because that's theology. That's where theology works for me in all of those areas. In my work life, I work with the Presbyterian Church of Wales, and specifically I work with the South East Wales Presbytery, and I'm the Minister of Presbytery, so I have responsibility for helping out wherever I can in communities and churches across South East Wales. So that includes most of the South Wales valleys, Cardiff, Newport, and the Vale of Glamorgan as well. It's a busy job, largely because our churches are in a state of weakness, I would say. And so there's a lot to do. So yeah, it involves a lot of traveling around South Wales. It involves a lot of meetings and wonderfully a lot of cooperating with other denominations as well, and seeing how we can make people's lives better in this part of the world.
It's interesting to me that you chose to talk about the recent flooding of your house, because there's something that I sense about the very materiality of spiritual formation, practical theology, everyday spiritual life that ought not and cannot escape the very material conditions. How would you say the material conditions that you are in Wales shape when you talk about practical theology, when you talk about formation? How have you been shaped by that environment?
I've lived in the South Wales Valleys almost all my life. There were 5 years of my life where I was in London, and that was for study. But apart from that, I've been in the South Wales Valleys, and I feel that I don't know, I can't speak for others, but for me, I am very much shaped by the topography of these valleys, and by the economic condition of these valleys, by the politics of these valleys. The South Wales Valleys are known for their history of coal mining. I think I think there was it's true that in the 1920s, a quarter of all the coal produced in the entire world was produced here in the South Wales Valleys. And of course, they are also known for their militant politics. But that politics, the left-wing politics that emerged in the South Wales Valleys, emerged fundamentally from the Christianity that was also flourishing here in the South Wales Valleys. So even when I was growing up in the 70s, there were nonconformist chapels on most streets in the towns of the valleys. It was still true then that a huge number of people would attend church. The culture of the South Wales Valleys was still very much influenced by the chapel. That then fed into the politics, a very strong left-wing politics that gave birth to people like an Irene Bevan, for example, the founder of the NHS. All of that is with me. I cannot escape that. And so my theology, my understanding of what it means to be me, to be a Christian, entails social justice. And if I grew up somewhere else, if my experiences of somewhere else, I dare say that my priorities would be different. But that runs through my veins. A passion for social justice, a passion to help those who are being treated unfairly, passion to campaign, passion to just to get stuck in. And that is practical theology. I mean, that is my practical theology. I think I've just given a bit of an outline of where I come from theologically, I suppose.
Go ahead, Zaidi.
Oh, thank you, Eric. I was going to ask you, how different do you think that might be if you weren't based in South Wales?
You know, I cannot begin to answer that question. I have no idea. Absolutely no idea. I mean, I guess I'm tempted to come up with some facetious answer about how much poorer I would be, and I mean, who would ever want to be anywhere else, and that kind of thing. But one of the joys of being in BIAPT, and being so involved in BIAPT for, I think it was 6 years, I was on the committee and so on, was meeting people from other communities and other parts of the world and other faiths, and engaging with that difference and those different perspectives. And that enriched me. And so although I can say, yes, it would be different, I don't think it would be poorer. It would just be different. I mean, I've been really blessed, Saiyyidah, by our conversation, the many conversations we've had over the years. Equally, I've been blessed by knowing you, Eric. You come from completely different backgrounds. from me. So I think it'd be just as rich, if perhaps very, very different.
I'll tell you what's behind my question, because I think
Okay.
in some respects, the three of us individually are kind of still one way or another located within our histories. So
Yeah.
I'm in London, born and raised here. My mum, I live 5 or 6 miles away from the house that I grew up in. And I think there is something for me just about the ease with which I can now sit within who I am, because I understand the location that I'm in. And I think that then helps me to connect at a much deeper level with the actual day-to-day practice of my faith and the reason behind why I'm doing some of the things that I'm doing, rather than when I've been located elsewhere, there's a bit more of a distance between the core of who I am and the ease with which I'm able to live it.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. And do you find yourself being shaped then by being somewhere else? The core of who you are, even it's being changed by that. The reason I ask that is those few years when I was in exile, when I was condemned to being outside of the South Wales valleys, they were profoundly important to me. And coming back to the South Wales valleys after that, I was very much a different person and had to find a whole new way of locating myself within these communities and engaging with the communities here.
I mean, I would say I concur with that. I mean, I spent 10 years living in Glasgow, and I love I love Scotland. I love Glasgow. I easily go back, but it would be a different version of home. Whereas when I'm uh, here, I can't quite describe why. I just feel more settled. And is that because I understand the location and the politics and the society and everything? And I get it, like very, London is an entity of its own in many respects. It's quite
Yeah.
different and can be difficult to live in, but I get it. And when I've been abroad, perhaps it's because I haven't necessarily understood the sense with some level of sensitivity, the environment that I'm in, that I can place myself there, but I still don't feel as settled as I do when I'm home.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, yeah. It's a curious thing because my wife and I, we talk often about moving, and I think she has a greater sense of rootedness here in this community, and I think that would be more of a challenge for her to move than it would be for me, perhaps for those reasons that you're mentioning there, Saiyyidah.
It's interesting when that you use the term exile, because that's a powerful symbol and metaphor within Judeo-Christian traditions about
Yeah,
being exiled from the land. But exile, and however seriously that you want to use that term, but being away from somewhere that's your roots, there seems to be something about being able to see differently from another perspective, from another physical location, but then once back in your rooted place, seeing that again differently, having been away. And how, when you've worked with people over the years, how have you, if at all, been helping them to think about who they are and where they are in relation to not being where they might want to be? And really mean a physical sense in this.
I'm not sure that I've been particularly successful in doing that. If I'm honest with you, I find your question very challenging for that reason. I found ministry. I mean, when I came back from London, I was a minister here in Rhondda for just over 20 years. And that always felt quite a bit of an arm wrestle, to be honest with you. Particularly at the time, when I first started in ministry, I did see the role of the ministers rather than accompanying people on their journey through life. Some people say the journey of faith. I saw it as about changing people, getting people to change, and so on. And therefore, the experience of that experience wasn't one whereby I think I was able to get people to reflect on where they are and how that informs their identity. I think to some extent it took me many years really to formulate a way of getting alongside people and to bring who I am, being shaped by my own experiences, to gain some traction with them, to get that conversation going, whereby who I am can interact with who they are. I think Bayat helped me a great deal in doing that, if I was to be perfectly honest with you. But yeah, I feel I'm rambling here a lot, Eric, largely because I think I feel very challenged by the question. I feel, yeah, that's really what I should have been doing all along. So maybe I should just leave it at that and live with my own sense of guilt.
We certainly don't want to induce guilt in this conversation, but there's something, isn't there, about understanding our own spirituality as something that is so connected, not just to who we are, but where we are.
Mm.
There's an awful lot of the language, maybe, of spirituality it's not generic, but it's sort of above the neck type language. When what you're talking about and your discoveries of practical theology and your own rootedness in a particular context might suggest that there's an awful lot more about spirituality that's rootedness and reflection on place,
Yeah,
as well as reflection on inner emotional, psychological, spiritual experiences.
certainly. And if I was to reflect on the space where I am now, I live on a street that is right towards the bottom of the valley here in the Rhondda Fach. So I'm close to the river. But behind this street, there are now playing fields, football field, rugby field, cricket pitch. That used to be where the colliery was. So Ferndale Colliery was located there. And you cannot escape the ghost or the ghosts of that colliery when you're living here. Back in 1867, early in the morning, there were 2 explosions in pit number 1, Ferndale Colliery. And I can't quite remember the figures, but I think it was 157 men and boys died that morning, the youngest being 12 years old. There was an inquiry and recommendations were made. It was found actually that the blame was the pit manager who failed to maintain safety. And every one of the recommendations that were made in that inquiry was ignored. So that 18 months later, there was another explosion and another 57 men and boys lost their lives. Now, stories like that, tragically, are commonplace here in the valleys, where men and boys' lives were just thrown away in the pursuit of wealth. What does that mean for who I am here as the grandson of 2 miners, 2 of whom were killed by coal mining? Who does that say? What does that say about my theology? How am I as an individual formed by that. And then in my ministry, how can I bring that into my conversations with other people? I think towards the end of my ministry, that was very much more present as we tried to explore what it meant to grow as human beings together and to be more alert and more aware of the injustices that are present, baked into our political structures, if you like. And so I would agree that where we are, and this is very strongly the case, I think, here in the South Wales Valleys, does form, therefore, who we are, the geology as well as the topography of this place. Yeah, it has a profound impact on me every single day.
Because you're describing your context and its history, and what you're choosing to foreground in that retelling of those stories is not going to be accidental. That's going to be probably shaping and reflecting your spirituality, your theology, what you're choosing. And I'm curious as to how, all of us who are involved in practical theology might be able to help others to do that sort of task. What is it that I'm seeing, and why am I seeing in my context what I see? Why do I remember the bits? It's really for Saiyyidah as well. How can we facilitate people to think through the embeddedness?
I think this is a tremendously important question, and it was something that was on my mind when I was on the committee in BIAT, that really practical theology has a place in the everyday lives of us all, whether or not we are in the ministry, or whether or not we belong to an academic institution and studying theology. There needs to be a way where we take the knowledge that is held within the practical theology community, if there is one, and take it into all our communities so that we have these conversations. And we did start actually when we were in BIAT, reflecting on ways that this could be done. So taking practical theology into the community so that that reflection that you speak of can be done. And that's very much on my mind in my current role as well. So we were chatting earlier before we started about some of the projects that I'm doing, and one of them is that I'm looking to develop a formation program for the Presbyterian Church of Wales to be delivered at Coleg Trefecca, which is a wonderful place. I mean, I'm going to do a plug here, if that's okay. Okay, anybody watching this, look up Coleg Trefecca on the internet. It is a beautiful place for a retreat. So honestly, go there. But we're looking to bringing a formation program, and this is all still in discussion actually, and being developed. And when I was asked really to reflect on this, what I wanted to bring there information in this process was, the process of theological reflection, those conversations whereby we do think about our place, our history, where we do bring our experience into conversation with our beliefs, our beliefs about God, and where those conversations not only are had internally, but are had communally as well. I mean, I found the work of David Hayward on this, on reimagining ministerial formation, to be quite helpful as well. So that what I'm trying to develop there then is a process that will be for everybody. Anybody can come. They will be bringing their own everyday experiences, and we will, as groups formed together, be discussing those everyday experiences and following roughly, some pattern for theological reflection, the pastoral cycle, for example. Hope to, through those conversations, bring development, growth, yeah, growth and flourishing of the individual. I'm rambling again. You really you should jump in and stop me. But that growth and that formation is very much rooted in the everyday. That's my point. It's very much rooted in everyday experiences, and it is through those and through the conversations about those that people then can grow.
Well, I mean, I'm benefiting from your rambling, so thank you for sharing. Because my reflection on the what you've just shared there is the I suspect that, Owen, you've done a huge amount of your own work to get you to the point where you can identify that there is a need for something to be able to kind of create a space for others to do, whether we want to call it practical theology or theological reflection or whatever. I think in some ways the name is irrelevant, but the piece of work to understand where you are in relation to who you are, your identity, your location, your relationship with God or not God, if you choose not to have or to have a belief in God directly. But it's just a really, really interesting piece in terms of I firmly believe that in order to be able to support others, one has to do their own work. And I think that your description there is a testimony to your own development and your own time and investment into that. So to then be in a space where you're able to make this offering to other people is just fabulous.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I feel a little bit guilty again hearing you speak because I'm not aware necessarily that I've done that work. I've been blessed with wonderful relationships and people who have helped me personally. So perhaps it's in those relationships that work has been done, I suppose. But yeah, that's very generous of you, Saiyyidah.
Can I take just a slightly different direction in our
Yeah.
conversation, in that telling the stories of our own context and histories, it's not difficult to find the tragic and the sad and those, because often those will have such a profound influence, as you've described in the Welsh Valleys. But what about the comedic? Because there's a lot of everyday life is actually quite funny. We get ourselves into scrapes. We say something, somebody says something to us. Social media can be full of really not necessarily biting at all, but just really good observation of just what is ludicrous in everyday life. I'd love to hear you say something about what is ludicrous about the everyday spirituality. Maybe the everyday spirituality of Owen Griffiths, or maybe everyday spirituality. And how does that feed in to who we are?
This is outrageous. I'm sorry. This is outrageous. I'm a Calvinist, and you're asking me to talk about comedy? Come on, Eric. I'm meant to be dour. That's who I am. I mean, yeah. I mean that's life, though, isn't it? I mean, life is ludicrous, is it not? I can't. You put me on the spot in wanting to highlight any one thing or another, but I do think that your point is a really, really valuable one. If our spirituality is rooted in the everyday, then it must engage with the ludicrous, with the absurd. And I guess for many people, actually, even saying that it's rooted in the everyday, that might be the resistance to it, because it doesn't, like, the everyday is so mundane.
Mhm.
And if it's not mundane, then it is absurd. And surely we can't infect our spirituality, our sacred spaces, with talk of the absurd and the mundane. And so maybe that's our resistance towards speaking of spirituality in these ways, or speaking of theology as being a theology of the everyday. Possibly, yeah.
There is something terribly serious about phrases like theological reflection.
Yeah.
It sort of implies angst and trauma and tragedy. And I think you're onto that makes it difficult for us to talk about the comedic, the ludicrous, the ordinariness, because it doesn't seem to be freighted with the same weight. But maybe that's a contribution of practical theology to find the fun, the playfulness
Yeah.
in spirituality of everyday life.
It does sound so serious, doesn't it? Theological reflection. Can I share something with you that is perhaps quite absurd? I had this idea that I was going to do a theological reflection, make it a part of my day, but intentionally so that I would write down my reflections and so on and so forth. And the most important part of this was looking for a notepad that I could do this in. And it took literally now, I mean, this might sound stupid, but it took me months to find the notepad that I was happy with, that it would be special. And here it is. It's on my desk. There's the notepad. Yeah. I bought this notepad about 4 months ago. Let me show you what I've done. It is completely empty, you know. I think that's the absurdity of it for me, you know, because theological reflection, it does sound so highfalutin, it does sound so serious. I'm rubbish at it. I really am.
I think I would say that you're not rubbish at it, if you'll permit me to, and say that perhaps actually it's the accepted methods of theological reflection that we speak about that perhaps, dare I say, are, I wanted to say flawed, but that's not quite right. But they're a little bit restrictive because we think that there is a process for doing something. And if we're not doing it that way, then we're wrong. But actually, for me, what I heard you say, Owen, even in that journey of spending several months to find the notepad, there was something very precious and delicate within that. And I heard a theological and a spiritual journey within that process, you know. So I suppose as we wrap up for today, the kind of curiosity that I might start to draw our conversation to a close with is to say, where is the reflection that one is doing, regardless of how we frame it and how we actually do it? Because I suspect it's happening on a minute by minute basis.
I do agree. Not necessarily with the first part, because I think I just like notebooks, and I like to buy them, and I like to treat myself. But certainly with the second part, I mean, I think you're prompting me to draw the lesson from this. The theological reflection for me is not done on a page. It is done in conversations with others. It is done in relationships, and it is done through action. And for some people, writing down on a page is intrinsic to that process and leads to the same place. But for me, less so, perhaps less so. So yeah, it brings us back again to the everyday. What is my everyday experience? So it isn't writing reams and reams of stuff in a notepad, actually. It's precious moments like this when I get to talk to people who I deeply, deeply respect and I'm keen to learn from.
Thank you, Owen. And I think for me, this has probably been one of the highlights of my week in terms of reflection and just being able to have a wonderful conversation with somebody that I'm consistently learning from. So thank you, Owen.
Oh,
And
dear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Owen. And we wish you well with your preparation for spiritual formation program and what you're doing in your relatively new role down there in Wales. So thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please do share links with us for the Centre for your Spiritual Reflection piece once it's formed, and we'll put that into the notes for this particular podcast. And I know you're very heavily involved with a charity as well that provides support to people in need. So we'll put that link in here as well. And again, Owen, thank you so much. And for
Pleasure.
our listeners and our viewers, thank you for listening and watching this podcast. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If there's a space to put a comment, please do. And we look forward to seeing you again in another conversation in practical theology. Until then, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.